Welcome to this special episode of AU Manufacturing Conversations, which is part of our annual Australia's 50 Most Innovative Manufacturers campaign. This time around, the 50 Most Innovative has been made possible through the support of these wonderful sponsors: Australia Wide Engineering Recruitment, TXM Lean Solutions, the Industry Capability Network, Bonfiglioli Australia, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, and the SmartCrete CRC. If you're interested in nominating, please see a link in the episode details. It's completely free to be a part of this campaign and always will be, and we'll be celebrating the announcement of the 50 Most Innovative list and the award winners at a special breakfast event on May 7 at Crown Melbourne during Australian Manufacturing Week. Now on with the show. Gentlemen, welcome to AU Manufacturing Conversations. Good to have you on the podcast, John and Jonathan.
Good to be here.
Thanks. Let's just get into the very, very basic opening question. How did you get here and what do you make?
So I'm Jonathon Wolfe, the CEO of Optera, which is a recent spinout from Western Sydney University, International Centre for Neuromorphic Systems. And the spinout is commercialising intellectual property that's the result of 5 or 6 years of research. And my history is in spin-out companies from university, so I've got a long track record of the last 20 years in doing that. So I'm solving industry problems using new techniques in electronics and computer engineering around this wacky area called neuromorphic engineering, which is biologically inspired systems. So not biologically plausible, but biologically inspired. So we look at how nature's and evolution has driven activities or tasks or capabilities, and we see how we can instantiate them into today's electronics, and that gives significant advantages in terms of potential use of low data, low power, low volume, and all those inherent advantages that we get from biological systems that we haven't been able to today as yet instantiate properly into current computer systems.
Right, well, before we get to Don and his background, you gave me a pretty good, very illustrative example of a dragonfly earlier. Could you perhaps share that with listeners?
Yeah, so the dragonfly is an incredible being. It sits in the environment, surveilling it in three-dimensional space in real time. It has very, very poor vision, and yet when it perceives a mosquito in the environment, it launches itself towards where that mosquito is going to be, not where it is. So in some way and somehow it's predicting the flight of an erratic other system based on its poor vision system and its auditory system to capture those mosquitoes. And it does that on less than a milliwatt of power, and it does it with 85 to 90% efficiency. So we can't even come close to that in terms of prediction of drones or other systems that are flying around. So we're one of the really good examples and inspiration for us, and actually the inspiration for the name of our company is Optera, which is a species of dragonfly in South America.
I was going to ask the very basic, how did your band get its name question, but
Yep.
You just covered that for me. On to you, Don. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi, Don Wright. I'm Executive Director of Enterprise at Western Sydney University. So what that means is I essentially look after the nexus between the university and industry in terms of how we activate partnerships around collaborative research and innovation more broadly. So my portfolio works across startup incubation and acceleration, the typical knowledge exchange, tech transfer type activities, what we call precinct activation, which is helping activate innovation precincts around campuses, and also the processes around research commercialisation. So helping companies like Jonathon has set up to spin out of the university and set up licensing deals with industry. So we pull all of that activity together under this one banner of enterprise. How I got here is interesting. I'm not an academic. I come from industry, spent probably 20 years in industry working across automotive and aerospace production environments and design environments, and then have worked also running my own consultancy in the manufacturing space, working across government grant acquisition, helping governments think through Australian industry participation in major defence programs, and also helping companies think through how to adapt their business models to be more globally competitive and to access industries like aerospace and defence. I came into the university about 12 years ago on a short-term assignment, which was a couple of weeks, and have been here ever since. But really enjoy the university environment as working with the researchers in particular and working on how we translate the capability and understanding that we have within universities, which I think is in some ways probably an undervalued asset by industry, and trying to work through how we break down the barriers so that people in industry can more effectively access and work with universities to be able to bring that technology into their business. It's a really interesting role, and having a manufacturing background, mechanical engineer by trade, and also working pretty extensively across commercial business and government, it provides an interesting lens to be able to see how we can better get universities and industry working together, which is the core of driving better innovation outcomes in Australia.
You mentioned the translating of capability, and Jonathan, you've spent your career doing that over and over and over again. Tell us about some of the spin-out businesses that you've helped found.
My background originally was in high-growth IT businesses, where I started my career and ran my first company back in the 90s. But as a result of a couple of transactions, I ended up working in the university sector and recognising the pain of sort of spinning out and standing up commercial impact from the research. So I embarked on that career to look at industry needs, where the industry was really struggling to fulfill problems or bottlenecks or those sorts of things. I would go back into the university and try and find research that was actually looking at the same problem or maybe orthogonal to it, so I could then pull it out and establish a company. And I had, from my previous career, good access to the venture capital community as well. So I'm on my 7th spin out from 5 different universities, and there's a couple of different areas, but if it's all driven by industry need, my interest is more about, well, are we really solving the problem? So in my first spin out from Sydney University, we looked at spatial hearing for hearing aids, and could we develop algorithms that would reassert the ability of the human brain to determine where a sound was coming from, so we could then pay attention to it. In today's hearing aids, if you know anything about them or you have an experience with someone who wears them, basically all the sound sounds like it's coming from the inside of your head. And that's because they deliberately, in the past, have cut off all the information that the brain uses to assert where a sound is coming from. So we built an algorithm that brought that information back into the hearing range of the hearing impaired, and then neuroplasticity meant that they could reassert the place of a sound in three-dimensional space and then pay attention to it. So that was the first one I did. We globally licensed that to a number of hearing aid manufacturers, and it was a great business. I then worked on another problem, which was cow pregnancy detection. How do you find a person to determine whether a cow is pregnant? Well, the only way was to find a vet who would then have to stick their hand up the backside of the cow and feel whether there was another cow in the uterus. And that's a dangerous, unpleasant job. But more importantly, at that time, between Perth and Darwin, there are only about 3 vets that would do it. And they charge about $4.50 a cow. But the problem was, if a farmer put a cow on a truck and send it to be exported or send it to the abattoir, they would do pregnancy tests at the destination. And if the cow was pregnant, it wouldn't go any further. So they have to put the cow back on the truck and send it back to them, back to their farm. So it became a very expensive problem. So we developed essentially a device that anyone with no skill could put against the side of a cow and listen to see if there were 2 heartbeats inside. So if there were 2 heartbeats, by definition, or 3, it had to be pregnant. So we solved that problem, and the challenges around that was trying to match the performance of a vet. So we got a lot of investment from Meat Livestock Australia and Dairy Milk Australia, and the industry were very keen to solve that problem for cow export. And so that was a great business, raised a lot of money, solved a bunch of problems. I also looked at solar panel production, looking at how you can find the faults in solar panels by fluorescing the substrate at the early stages of production to determine if there are any cracks or any problems in it, and kick it out of the production line before you'd actually layered more expensive material on top of the substrate. So again, solving that, what was a significant problem. Unfortunately, the Chinese got into that market big time, and the cost of the substrate and the panel itself went from sort of $100 to $10, so no one cared. But that's the way of a startup. You solve the problem if you can see, and you can try and develop it. I suppose the other thing that I've built into my career is, can we establish a globally leading intellectual property position, like through patents or know-how or trade secret, that we can sustain and build the business on as it matures, recognizing that opportunity will be recognized by others at some point, either as you exploit it or they're doing it independently of you. So you need to have a position that's defensible, and you can collaborate effectively with the industry value chain that you see, so you can maintain a business as it grows and develops on a global basis. So again, a lot of intellectual property, a lot of patent strategy, a lot of work in terms of determining how the best this startup can create a position that's sustainable in a globally and often fiercely competitive market. So the one I'm doing at Western Sydney University is a business called Optera, as we said before, and it's looking at how do you track satellites, how do you track satellites from the ground, how do you track satellites if you're on orbit. And the issues on orbit are becoming increasingly congested and contested. So our adversaries are using orbital domains to gain advantage. But there's also, just in the terms of the statistics, there might be somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 active satellites on orbit today. Projections are in the next 5 years it'll be 60,000, and there's hundreds of thousands will go up in the near future, in the next decade or so. So that becomes increasingly congested and a real problem where you need to navigate against something that's also going at 28,000 kilometres an hour. How do you know if you're going to run into it? What manoeuvres do you likely make versus what manoeuvres they likely make? And how do you avoid a collision, which then creates a debris cloud, which then affects everyone else in the vicinity and potentially destroys those orbits? So that's a real need that's emerging as the space economy grows. We're looking at transparency and sustainability in space to maintain what is projected to be a $1.5 to $1.7 trillion economy by 2035. So that's a real need in industry. How can we use our capabilities like the neuromorphic sensors we're building to deliver low size, low power, low data rate sensors that will operate in orbit and deliver a customer product that they want to buy?
So we might change gears for a moment. We'll come back to Optera. Tell me please, Don, I'm sure listeners would like to know a little bit about what you do here at Factory of the Future. What are you working on now? We walked past some equipment that's being set up. Talk us through it, please.
We're inside a new campus here at Bankstown. This campus has been here a bit over 12 months, I think. That campus, we have decided to set up this facility called the Factory of the Future. It's a way to engage with the local community primarily. We wanted to engage with local industry and work out a way that we could best use the campus to support local industry and our engagement with industry. So one of the biggest games in town in Bankstown is manufacturing. So we looked at how we could work with local manufacturers to help their innovation journey and help, Australian manufacturing companies need to modernise, they need to progress their capabilities in digital and other areas. So we've designed this facility called Factory of the Future, which is really intended to fast track the commercialisation journey for SME companies. Companies that have constrained resources, time poor, can't just go out and buy a really flashy, expensive piece of kit. They don't always have the capital to manage that sort of thing. So the Factory of the Future provides a tech demonstration capability where they can come in and see and play with that type of equipment, whether it's metal 3D printing or it's advanced robotics or it's some other type of automation equipment, for example. And then we work through how we provide the tech demonstration, the visibility and awareness of what's out there, the skilling around taking their workforce from the point of looking at this type of equipment to actually integrating, installing and operating it as part of the business, and managing the R&D process around that. So working with researchers and others in the university and connecting into other stakeholders that we work with, partners, equipment providers and others that can help that journey. The facility here will operate across about 400 square metres of space on 2 floors within the building, with a very strong focus on digitisation, or the digital twinning, if you like, as a way to describe that, whereby companies, increasingly we're looking at the opportunity for digital twins to be an engagement point where companies can understand how to kind of forecast the type of capability they'd like to have, can simulate the way that that capability could operate within the business, and then drive investment, business case development, justification around that. So digital twinning has become a really central part of and almost an engagement tool for the facility. So we will have one area focused on really tech demonstration and that opportunity to engage, and another area largely focused around R&D and training. And that'll be open in around February, March in 2025. Any business across Sydney that can come here and access it is available to come and work with us. But we will particularly, in the first instance, focus around the local manufacturing community in Bankstown. And it will network with a range of other facilities like the AMRF being built out at Bradfield, capability we have in our Kingswood campus around materials, composites, metal 3D printing, design, and also work we're doing in Parramatta to co-locate a company called Omron, which is a large robotics and automation company which is moving their headquarters in to co-locate on our Parramatta Engineering Campus building.
Right. What's the industrial profile of this neighbourhood look like? What sort of companies are manufacturing here?
Look, interestingly, you have a broad range, from steel products to automation companies to chemical manufacturers, rubber manufacturers, and then people working in aerospace and defence like Quickstep just down the road here at Bankstown Airport on the old Hawker de Havilland and Boeing site. So there's a really broad range, and I think what we will see in places like the AMRF, where our university has a role as well, operating what's called AMRF Connect, which is the activation service of AMRF, you'll probably see specialisations around focusing on areas like defence and medtech and some of those areas, whereas Factory in the Future will have a little bit more of a catch-all type focus where we will deal with lots of different manufacturers. And we'll see that across the network of sites where there will be sites that will probably have more of a specialisation and sites that will operate more broadly across the sector. But important that we, there's sort of two things that have to happen in Western Sydney. We have to modernise the existing industry that is here, and we have to seed and nurture future industries around things like microelectronics, semiconductors, quantum, which will be those industries of the future. That we really have to run with those two goals. We have to walk and chew gum on that front. That's really critical. Protect existing jobs and to be growing new jobs.
In terms of how we've been thinking about, again, going back to the application of the sort of work that we've done in the research centre, is looking at neuromorphic engineering and saying, well, these sensors that we design, the semiconductor sensors that we design at the university are akin to the human eye. They don't operate like a camera, they operate much more like the human eye, and what that allows you to do is work at very, very high resolution in very, very difficult visual environments and produce very little data out against your use case. So in terms of the Factory of the Future and the neuromorphic showcase that we're putting together here, we're showing that this type of engineering, this type of assessment of real-time intelligence in the network allows you to be highly predictive of failure, reduce significant amounts of waste, reduce the amount of power because you're always monitoring the efficiency of the systems that are operating. So we can provide this biological inspiration to solving real-time problems and solving downstream problems of adopting advanced manufacturing, because it's not a panacea, it still has wastage, it still has inefficiency. So we're trying to showcase to Western Sydney and also, I guess, nationally, that neuromorphic principles and neuromorphic engineering principles applied to advanced manufacturing, either at using the silicon retina or the silicon cochlea, where we've developed a proxy for human hearing that uses our uncanny ability to localize sound or hear the difference, very subtle differences in sound. So that can also be predictive of different vibration changes or different cutting measures or different welding splatter. We can hear all those different things and alert the operators, or have a closed loop tracking system that predicts that that's out of kilter within a certain range, and then the operators can be alerted or we can adjust that in real time. So we're looking at a number of significant sort of differentiators in not only the application of a Factory of the Future, but a smart Factory of the Future using neuromorphic engineering principles.
This is a short interlude to again thank the sponsors that are making 2025's 50 Most Innovative campaign possible. Our appreciation goes out to these legends: Australia Wide Engineering Recruitment, TXM Lean Solutions, the Industry Capability Network, Bonfiglioli Australia, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, and the SmartCrete CRC. Now back to the show.
Let's talk about some other neuromorphic applications, and I guess we talk about the heritage of what you're doing and the idea of pixel by pixel sort of event-based tracking of objects. In the case of the drill, that might be one such object, but you've applied this in the space domain. Tell me about how it's done, how this retina works, and some more on that.
Traditional computer vision systems that have been around for a long time essentially took the idea of a camera, which is a frame-based camera, and the camera was essentially designed and developed in the late 1800s to fool the human eye into re-establishing the scene as if you were there. So basically what it does, it captures all of the information in the scene in a snapshot. And if you see a movie, everyone knows that movies flow at least 30 frames a second. So you've got huge replication between frames of all the information that is required to fool the human eye into believing that they're watching a real scene. Whereas if you're trying to achieve a task using a computer system, you actually don't need frames. What you need is a system that has, let's say, 1 million pixels all there, sitting there waiting for contrast changes or changes in the environment. And it only activates the pixels where that change is happening. So in this example, you can have a system looking at a drill or a CNC laser machine or tracking a satellite on orbit, and it's only capturing the data that's changing. So if you imagine in traditional satellite tracking, a frame-based camera will be looking at stars, and there's a hell of a lot of black space up there that's also generating a hell of a lot of data because you're taking photos of that at 10 frames or 30 frames a second. Whereas a neuromorphic silicon retina is just looking at the stars and only activating those pixels. So you're orders of magnitude less data. So we've been applying the silicon retina to that problem. How do you track a satellite, either from orbit or from the ground, but generate significantly less bits of data and also do intelligent matching of the behavior of that thing? Because we can tell based on glinting and based on the behavior of the object as it moves through space, we generate what we call a temporal pattern of the thing moving. So if you look at the history of image recognition or image prediction, say Google, when they first started to get their computer to recognize a cat, they took 16 million photos on 160,000 computers to allow themselves to have a system that would recognize a cat. Whereas we look at a cat moving and how a cat moves, and we can determine whether it's that cat or another cat just on the way that it moves, because we're actually looking at the object moving through space, not a photo of it. So again, we're just capturing the changes, not the photo that we need. So in most instances in computer vision or most industrial applications, what you need to see is variation or anomaly detection, not a photo. So there will always be cases where you might want to turn on your high rate, high definition vision system to see for a human to look at it. But we think about 95% of the cases you can use the silicon retina to generate the amount of information that you need to make a decision. So the silicon retina, the silicon cochlea works in the same way. The human auditory system is very adept at determining changes in pitch and changes in tone, and also locating it, because we have two ears, and the time it takes to get from one ear to the other in terms of loudness and time allows us to locate things very precisely, which we use to know whether we should cross the road now or not, or whether there's a tiger behind the tree. It's an evolutionary power that we've developed because it's been necessary. So again, that's the principle of neuromorphic engineering. Develop a system and a sensor and an algorithm that only delivers the relevant information to allow you to make the task decision, not give me a whole range of information that I have to do a hell of a lot of post-processing on to extract information from. The sensor will give you the information, and then you can have very lightweight learning algorithms that then determine if things are out of kilter or need to be addressed in some way to maintain the efficiency or collect the data on orbit for your customer. So it's a completely different way to think about gathering information. And then once you've got smaller information, how do you process it as close to the sensor as you can, so you can reduce comms, reduce power, and reduce data storage. Another scary statistic is that in the 2030, the estimate is that data centers will consume more power than anything else in the world. So they'll be using more than 50% of the electricity developed and produced in the world will go towards storage of data. And we only look at 3% of it. So we're using more than electricity than anything else, and we're only using 3% of the data that we store. That is not a sustainable position. So we've been looking at that problem. Let's just collect the data we need and then process it and make decisions about it, and then only store what's relevant, rather than just storing everything just because we can, because that's not going to survive.
This is a standard question for this series, and the question's a bit basic, but keen to get your thoughts on it. What makes a company innovative?
I think from my sort of experience looking at lots of, I'll pick SME companies, I think typically we tend to see a leader within that business, usually the owner or the general manager or managing director, whatever sort of position they have, that historically in a lot of those SME businesses is the driver, and it's usually driven out of a personal passion, whether they're a precision engineering firm, a tool making firm, some other type of manufacturer. They tend to be passionate about their business and they will drive the company forward, usually around that particular technology or process. So those individuals are key drivers and then take other people on the journey with them. I think what we're seeing now is that's shifting a little bit, and you start to see these new generation of people coming through, digital natives in particular, who have really good understanding of digital technology as users, maybe not even as developers, but with the potential. And they're starting to be more of the influencers in the business, to use a term, that are increasingly helping these businesses to understand what the potential is in areas maybe outside of their particular domain. If they're a company that's focused on CNC machining, or they're a fabrication company or some other type of business. So I think it's really important going forward that we recognise that innovation leadership needs to be brought more generally across the business and needs to be grown as a capability. So we talk a lot about innovation capacity building. So I think that's an observation I've had over the years, that we need to almost shift the baton away from this model where you have companies that are really driven out of just a particular individual. We absolutely still need those people, but we need a system where people are more well trained to be able to drive innovation across the organisation. Because it's what you tend to see is in SME businesses, they'll innovate to a point where they can afford it, but when it's driven out of a single leader type identity, it will often fall by the wayside as soon as times get tough, cash flow gets tight. Got to just absolutely deliver on business as usual, because if you don't get the product out the door, and if the quality control isn't right, everything will fall to pieces, and they will step away from their R&D activities or new product development or whatever happens to be. So yeah, I think it's typically where you see it coming from. Lots of other factors around access to capital, education and training, all of those things. But to me, the biggest drivers of innovation are individuals in businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I work with Don on running the Ignition Accelerator out of Launchpad at Parramatta, and we look for businesses that are solving real-world problems that have been validated by customer interaction, not a hypothesis that would be nice to solve one day or would serve the ego of the founder if it was solved. So we look for curiosity and we look for resilience as the two attributes for the founders. And so I think the combination of a team that's driven to solve the problem will not be constrained by the current solution for that problem. I recognise the problem and they will solve it in however way is the most efficient and effective way to drive the solution. So if the problem exists, innovation is getting to the core of that problem and solving that need in a demonstrable, effective and efficient and repeatable and scalable way. So that's what drives innovation for me, and the behaviours we look for in our startups and the behaviours that we look for in innovative companies are ones that are absolutely driven to solve the problem through technology, through people, through relationships, through stakeholders, through the ecosystem. They accrete around them will solve the problem. If they do it well, they'll be successful, they'll derive a good margin, and they'll deliver a growth in jobs and opportunity for the region.
I think that's really important. I couldn't count the amount of times I've found a company founder or a leader of a business, and manufacturers are a little bit classic, that will fall in love with their idea. And I think a lot of the times I have the really challenging conversation where I say to them, don't tell me why it's so good, tell me 5 reasons why it won't work. And that is really challenging. And then if you can get them to step back and challenge their own thinking, they all of a sudden develop a very different perspective around that issue of solving a problem that has a market of more than one, which can often be the case. So this idea that we're shifting away from, I love this idea, it's great, to I need to really understand the problem I'm solving. It's a big sort of step to take for people in their minds, but really critical.
Yeah, it's a healthy shift. I've seen many, not that I'm particularly old or wise or well connected, but I've seen plenty of companies fail because they're in love with their technology and that's the thing that drives them, and they think everyone needs this thing because it took them a lot of time to dream up, and that's not the way to approach
It's a really challenging balance between a founder who's tenacious to drive his idea forward, which is absolutely required, but is flexible enough to understand when he needs to pivot.
Yeah, I mean, we have a classic example when we're solving some of the problems that we've been looking at in the research centre and will be in Optera. We're not using event-based sensors. We're using mobile phone high frame rate sensors because they're the best sensor to do the job. But we're using neuromorphic processing to get all the advantages. So we're using the sensor that's appropriate, because you can buy those things for $4 and put it on anything. It's like a microscope. You put it on 20 on a drone, it'll be fine. But it's the processing so we're leveraging we're designing a system for the problem, which means find the exquisite sensor that does the job. Don't try and push silicon retinas down the throat of everyone. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. It's the processing and the understanding of how to do that processing that delivers most of the benefit, and then delivers the insight to the decision maker as quickly as possible, which in most of the cases we're looking at for space and defence. That's absolutely what they want. They don't care about the technology. And I talk a lot about neuromorphic engineering in some circumstances, but I talk more about the problem that we're solving and the issues we've addressed, and the technology is sort of down here somewhere.
I wanted to ask you about the bottle washer description, because it's not every day that I come across someone who has bottle washer as their job description on LinkedIn.
Okay. So I describe myself as the chief bottle washer because I'm, as a startup CEO who's done this many, many times before, you basically have to roll up your sleeves to do everything that needs to be done. You can't be proud. So if the bottle needs washing or the dishes need drying, I'm the guy who does it. And that's the ethos I want to build in my team. You might have a title, but the responsibility is to get the job done, and whatever needs to be done has to be done now. So we're bottle washers if we have to be, we're CEOs if we have to be, we're financiers, we're all things, and that's just recognising that to be a successful startup you have to be today.
We will get to the final question now, and that is, what's an issue within manufacturing that isn't getting the attention it deserves at the moment?
I think what I've seen over many years is consistently a challenge in management and leadership. And it's not that they're bad, it's that I think their training and preparation to be in those roles in a lot of SME companies, again, is traditionally driven by them growing up in the business. And whether it's a family company or not, usually what you'll see in those sorts of companies are very good at their domain, their discipline. If they're a machining business or fabrication or automation or manufacturing steel products, whatever widget it is, they're usually good at it. They exist because they are. When it comes to that next level of extension of the business into, say, the digital domain, where they have to implement a new ERP system, or they have to shift to digital twinning to help them simulate the impact of production shift, they need predictive maintenance, shutdown, type capability. That's where it can get really difficult. And there's different areas, but particularly as digital technology has, flourished throughout manufacturing businesses, that's been one area that can be challenging to keep up. The other thing I'd point to is the ability to adapt the business model. If you're a traditional manufacturer that makes widgets and sells them to oil and gas industry, and you want to add a digital service, or there's a market opportunity for you to do that where you can sell data back to your customer in addition to your physical product, that can be a really challenging requirement for a company that doesn't have a background in digitization or other. So increasingly you're seeing these companies needing to engage people either full-time or as consultants, or bring in even interns that can help them solve these problems. So I think the ability for companies to shift beyond just skilling up in their domain into shifting up into the way that they build a more holistic business model is really critical, and in particular in relation to leveraging opportunities like building digital services around their business. So I think that higher level capability is really critical, and we don't focus enough on it. I think it's an area that for us to become, if you want to get into defence, and you need to be interoperable, you need to be quality assured, you need to have the understanding of the market, so from a marketing point of view. So I think we've got to focus more on management, leadership and marketing, and in particular R&D, innovation related understanding and capacity building around innovation, to take the sector in Australia, and particularly in Western Sydney, forward to realise its full potential. So that's what I think. I wouldn't say it's missing, I think there's not enough focus on that.
And Jonathon?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I echo what Don's has said, but I suppose I put on my CEO of Optera hat, we're a fabulous semiconductor company. So I look at the value chain of what is in place in Australia, and I think, well, gee, there's a lack of understanding over many, many years in building up the end-to-end processes. We're never going to have a fab in Australia because we don't have the capital and the volume to require it. But we haven't knitted up a value chain in the Australian context where we can do the testing, the packaging, the certification, the characterization, and the skill set. Back to Don's point, we haven't been training these guys or have a talent pool that's available to this sort of fundamental industry for the next industrial revolution, which is AI and coming right at us very quickly. So I think what's missing is an integrated view of that. And I know that New South Wales is trying to do stuff and South Australia is trying to do stuff. There's no plan that says, well, this is actually how we're going to knit it up and how we're going to make the investment that makes sense to me at the moment. So we as a business have been building our chips overseas and then having to get them packaged in Malaysia and then come back here. They don't work. So the cycle times is 6-9 months sometimes on these iterations when it should be a month. Why is it longer than that? You've got some universities have got some nascent, basically unutilized capital that they've put into a system. You've got the AMRF. So it'd be much nicer to see a integrated plan develop on a national scale that can look after the semiconductor industry. When you've got the CHIPS Act in the US, $150 billion has been put into reshoring semiconductor capability. I don't know what we're spending, but we're not spending a tenth of that. So I'd like to see that come together, and I think it's a significant gap, and we are where we are today, but surely this should have been anticipated and known if we didn't get a smack in the head by COVID and all the resilience that we need for our economy to survive and grow in a disrupted supply chain area. We're not moving fast enough on that.
Agreed. We did have a little bit of interest in the semiconductor supply chain. Again, after getting whacked in the head by COVID, and the chief scientist was supposed to have done a review, and that never happened. And I guess priorities changed because that's the nature of Australians. We just see a bright, shiny object, and then we see another one, and we just keep moving on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got the forum for this, but just this week we had the cancellation of 9102, JP 9102, which is the $7 billion military sat communications platforms, cancelled. The scuttlebutt in the industry as well, we don't need exquisite assets in geo anymore to survive. We can just rent the time from Elon Musk. What sort of sovereign risk are we taking on? Nothing to do with Elon, just not having our own assets to manage and control. We all saw it in the bushfires. We couldn't even get a satellite to come and look at we had to beg, borrow and steal from the Japanese to put a satellite over the top of all the bushfires because we just don't have control of the platform that we can look at.
I think in the semiconductor space, there are good investments. So the AMRF has a plan to put in a proof of concept facility into the AMRF2, which will come online in 26. There is the Moonshot report. There was a report came out of Chief Scientist in New South Wales.
Yeah.
I think we've got to send the signals to the industry, though, that we will invest, that there will be investment in this area. There'll be long-term investment. So both in terms of attracting investment from overseas and letting people in Australia, we have a boutique semiconductor industry in Australia, but some really interesting technologies. But if they don't get the signals, there's a bit of a catch-22 because we're looking at how we can train people around advanced packaging and testing now. It's difficult because we don't have the demand here to sustain training capability. So we're looking internationally to see how we can work with partners and potentially train people globally because we have great capability, particularly around design here. But we need the signals, and I think particularly from the federal government, we need a stronger plan that will give direction. Otherwise, the industry will flounder. The signals have to be there. The people need certainty, and we know it's an area of sovereign capability we have to address. We know there's huge market potential. We've got great partners in the space in countries around the world. Taiwan, the US, Korea, others, Vietnam potential. But we've got to get a national focus, and we've got to get some leadership around that so that we know where the sector's going.
Oh, maybe a job for the next government. Who knows?
Yeah, well, let's hope whichever side of politics it is, we get more direct, solid leadership, because this will be a point in time where we've got an opportunity and we've got to service things like AUKUS and leverage AUKUS. But if we don't provide those strong signals, we won't attract the investment internationally and we won't get the local industry engaged and we won't be able to build out the platforms. But at the moment, there are good signals. And what we're doing at AMRF is good. Our university is really keen to participate in that and really look at the training space. But, there is a challenge for the nation, I think, around that, in particular, the semiconductor and the quantum space. That one's even a little bit even more complicated. We've got to get on the front foot big time, because no one's going to wait for us internationally.
Well, that's probably a good spot to call that a wrap. Don, Jonathan, thanks for donating your time to our humble little podcast, AU Manufacturing Conversations. Lovely to meet you both, and thank you also for having me here at the Factory of the Future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.